There's a pretty good chance that I am the absolute worst in the world at getting back to people. What I mean by that is I'll have people call me or text me or something, and I just forget to get back to them. It doesn't matter what way they try to communicate to me, whether it be calling, texting, letters, emails, carrier pigeons, however it is that they choose to communicate something to me, I'm not really good about getting back to them. I'm not always the best at remembering to call friends or family just for no good reason, just to talk to them and find out what's going on in their lives. I'm not always as proactive as I should be when it comes to just staying in communication with people and connecting with people that matter most in my life. I'm not the best at that. I struggle in doing so. No matter what advancements we make to make communication easier, I still have a problem with getting back with folks. Like, you might think that now that I actually live in my hometown and my mom only lives a couple of miles from me now, that I'd be a lot better at remembering to call her. But I still occasionally get phone calls from my mom that start off with, "Hey, are you angry at me? Have I done something to upset you? Because you haven't called me in a very long time." Or take, for instance, a couple of weeks ago, I actually had the rarest of thoughts of mine of, "Hey, I should call this friend of mine from my days at Johnson because I hadn't talked to him in a while." And so when I called him, he answered the phone by saying, "Wow, it only took you 2 months to get back to me." Because apparently he had called me a couple of months beforehand, and I was in the middle of something and said, "Hey, I'll call you back." I mean, I still stand that I did call him back. I didn't say when. Or even take this week. This week I called up a friend of mine who had a really rough year. I mean, 2020 was rough for all of us, but for this particular friend, it was far worse. He was having to go through things that he never expected in his life, things that were hugely emotional and painful for him. And when I called him, I realized I hadn't talked to him in 9 months. That he'd been going through this incredibly difficult period of his life, and I, as one of his closer friends, wasn't there for him. It's not that I don't care. Like, that's not the case at all. It's not that I don't want to know what's going on. It's not that I don't want to share this load with them. It's not that I don't want to spend that time with them. It's just that I usually kind of get wrapped up in things that are going on here. Not necessarily here in the church, although that is a big part of it, but I get so wrapped up into things that are going on in my own life and the things that are happening right here and now that I kind of lose sight of everything and everyone else. I get busy doing projects at the house, or I get busy preparing sermons or doing whatever it is I'm doing here at the church that week, and I just kind of lose sight of these people in my life. I lose that connection. It's not that I don't care about my relationship to them. In fact, that's about as far from the truth as it could be. It's just that I'm so wrapped up in my schedule. I get so focused on things happening in my life or things that are going on in the lives of my daughters or just whatever's right in front of me in that moment. I'll occasionally have those thoughts, "Hey, I should call so-and-so," and then, "Oh, hey, there's something shiny," and I lose that distraction and I forget to call them in the first place. I want to maintain those relationships. I'd like to take the time out to do that, but I forget. I lose sight of it. I get so busy with other things that I forget to maintain these relationships. I think that probably most of us in this room, though, we could probably lay claim to something like that in our own lives. I'm willing to bet that you're better than I am at getting back to people, and if you've ever called me and I haven't called you back yet, it's not that I'm angry or that I'm upset, it's just I forgot. Sorry. If I don't write it down immediately or put it in my phone immediately, I'm going to forget. I'm going to give you a good rule of thumb, all right, folks? So just everybody listen to this. Sometimes you guys tell me something on Sunday morning before the service and all that stuff. I promise you I forgot it. It's not that I didn't want to. It's not that I meant to. Unless I wrote it down immediately afterwards, I forgot, and I'm sorry, and I love you. But all of us, we have this problem in our own lives where we get so wrapped up in things that are going on and things that are happening in our own world, we forget to check in on the worlds of other people. We forget to make phone calls to friends or family. We forget to stay connected with that person in our lives that we care a lot about. We don't do it intentionally, at least I don't think we do. just kind of things get away from us. If somebody's not in our everyday lives, or they're not somebody that we see on a consistent basis, it just becomes far too easy for us to lose sight of it, to lose sight of them. We know that the best way to build up our relationships is to stay in communication with them, but communication just becomes so difficult for us to maintain because we get so lost in the schedule of everything else that's going on around us. If we're really honest, and this might hurt a little bit, we prioritize our schedule over that person. Maybe not intentionally, but it's something that we do. And it's likely that most of us in this room, or most of us watching online, or anybody who's able to hear my voice right now, we could probably say the same thing about prayer. Like, prayer is the most basic thing in the Christian faith, is it not? I mean, it's something that we all understand, that we all know, that we all comprehend. We know that prayer is essentially just a conversation between us and God. It's an opportunity for us to take some time out of our lives and just have a chat with our Father in heaven, to tell Him all the things that are going on in our lives, to talk to Him about the things we'd like Him to intervene in, to just kind of share with Him the good things that are happening in our lives and thank Him for them, but also asking Him to kind of get rid of the things that maybe aren't so good. It's one of the most basic principles of our faith. We've heard about it, we've talked about it, we've read about it, we've done all this stuff. We know a lot about prayer. I haven't done the math myself, but I'm guessing that more than half of the sermons I've heard in my life have in some way, shape, or form involved prayer. That prayer was an important part of what was taught in the sermon that day. We know we need to be in prayer. We understand the importance of prayer. We understand the power of prayer. But for far too many of us, if we're really honest, if we strip it all away, we know we aren't praying. At least not to the level that we know we need to be. We know we're not praying as often as we should. Maybe we know we're not praying the prayers that we need to be praying. We tell people who tell us things in our lives, hey man, I'm going to pray for you. I'm going to share that with God. And we have every intention of doing so, but how often have we actually done that? It becomes difficult to do this. And again, I don't think this is intentional. I don't think that any one of us is being purposefully withholding our prayer. I don't think any one of us is crossing our arms and saying, well, I'm not talking to God and He knows why. I mean, at least I hope that's not the case for you in your life, but we all struggle with consistency in our prayer life, do we not? I know that's the truth for me. Can I say that and still be a pastor? Is that okay? Probably should have run that by some people. But I know that in my own life, I'm not as consistent in my prayer life as I need to be. I do believe that prayer has power to it, but I'm not accessing that power as often as I know I should. We get so wrapped up in all these other things going on in our lives, we oftentimes let our schedules overwhelm us. We get wrapped up in things at work, and we get so busy focusing on that, or we have things going on at home that just kind of overtake our minds, or we've got things going on at places that we volunteer at, or you know what? It's true. Sometimes we have things that are going on at church that keep us so busy. We get so wrapped up in doing the work of God that sometimes we forget to talk to God. All of us are guilty of this on some level. I'm certain of that. We know how often we should be praying. We know the importance of it. But we're just not having it. We allow our schedules to overwhelm us, to take that time away from prayer. Again, it's that we know we should be in prayer. We even know our need for prayer. But really, if we get down to the heart of it, the biggest issue is we don't prioritize prayer. We allow the things that are going on in front of us, we allow the things that are happening right here in the here and now to kind of take precedent over prayer. We don't make prayer a priority in our lives. We know we need to, We know we should, but we don't. And I can't help but wonder if that may be part of the reason why it becomes so easy for us to not prioritize prayer in our life. If one of the reasons why it becomes so commonplace for us to not prioritize prayer in our lives is because so often when we do pray, it doesn't seem effective. Every single one of us in this room, every person who's watching, everybody can hear my voice right now, we've all prayed for things in our lives. And we've prayed earnestly for them. We have prayed intently about them. We have been intense in our prayer. And it still goes unfulfilled, unanswered. Sometimes it feels like it's unwanted. We've had prayers go unanswered. And these prayers could range from all kinds of different things. Maybe the small little prayer of just making sure that every light that you find is green so that way you can make it to your appointment on time. Or maybe it's as big as praying that God doesn't take that loved one away from you. We've all had those prayers in our lives where we've prayed with all of our strength for this to happen only for it to not come to pass. And so it becomes hard for us to prioritize prayer because we don't see these prayers happening. So we wonder how effective our prayers actually can be. We may not vocalize that. We may not even think it that way, but it's kind of hard to prioritize something that you think isn't working. And so it becomes difficult for us to make prayer a part of who we are. We know we should still be praying because God does hear us when we pray. But when we don't see it happening, when we don't see the answer to that prayer, we don't see it going the way that we think it should, it makes it harder for us to come into that time. It makes it harder for us to prioritize that time in our lives. Man, for the early church, they knew the power that came from prayer. Even when the outcome already seemed determined, that early church was still committed to prayer. We know from our new favorite verse as a church, Acts 2:42, that they were even devoted to prayer. That no matter what was going on, they still prioritized prayer. No matter what was happening, they still made time to pray. Even when it didn't seem like their prayers were being listened to, they still prayed. They were intentional about it. They made time for it. Even when things seemed hopeless, even when it seemed impossible, they still made time to pray. But like us, I'm certain that they had prayers that went unanswered. And I'm certain that there were times that they questioned it. And I'm certain that there were some in that early church who maybe were just like us and kind of let prayer fall by the wayside because of it. But as a church, they still pushed the importance and the necessity of prayer. We see this actually play out in our text today in Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 16. So if you got a Bible or a Bible app or some sort of Bible thing near you, open it up to Acts chapter 12, verses 1 through 16. And we're going to see what happens there today. I'll give you a second. Here's what it says. It says, about that time King Herod violently attacked some who belonged to the church. He executed James, John's brother, with the sword. When he saw that it pleased the Jews, he proceeded to arrest Peter too, during the festival of unleavened bread. After the arrest, he put him in prison and assigned 4 squads of 4 soldiers each to guard him, intending to bring him out to the people after Passover. So Peter was kept in prison, but the church was praying fervently to God for him. When Herod was about to bring him out for trial, that very night Peter, bound with 2 chains, was sleeping between 2 soldiers, while the sentries in the front of the door guarded the prison. Suddenly an angel of the Lord appeared, and the light shone in the cell. Striking Peter on the side, he woke him and said, "Quick, get up." And the chains fell off his wrist. "Get dressed," the angel told him, "and put on your sandals." And he did. "Wrap your cloak around you," and he did so. "And follow me." So he went out and followed, and he didn't know what the angel did was really happening, but he thought it might be just seeing a vision. After they passed the first and second guards, they came to the iron gate that leads into the city, which opened to them by itself. They went outside and passed one street, and suddenly the angel left him. When Peter came to himself, he said, "Now I know for certain that the Lord has sent this angel to rescue me from Herod's grasp and from all the Jewish people expected." And as soon as he realized this, he went to the house of Mary, the mother of John Mark, where many had assembled and were praying. He knocked on the front door of the outer gate, and a servant named Rhonda came to answer. She recognized Peter's voice, and because of her joy, she did not open the gate, but ran in and announced that Peter was standing in the outer gate. "You're out of your mind," they told her. But she kept insisting that it was true, and they said it must be his angel. Peter, however, kept knocking. When they opened the door, they saw him, and they were amazed. Now, there's a few things before this that we need to kind of talk about to kind of set the stage, give us a little context of what's going on here before we get to talking more about this text. Just a couple of weeks ago, before the events of this chapter, if we go back just a few chapters, we saw the impossible happen. Something the church thought was never going to happen to them happened. Stephen, one of their very own, one who the book of Acts describes as being a man full of the Holy Spirit, was killed. For the first time, one of their very own had been murdered for his faith. Before that, the church never really had it much in the way of problems. They kind of lived very peaceful lives. They knew that the Pharisees and Jewish leaders, they weren't overly fond of them, but there's no chance that they were ever going to take it that far. And so when Stephen died, it brought in panic into the church. And for the first time in the church's history, they actually started scattering from the city of Jerusalem. For so long they had gathered at the temple. They had been a part of this city of Jerusalem. It had grown exponentially just in Jerusalem. And now, because of the fear that the church has, it's spread out. They left the city, running away, thinking that things are already bad enough. But now you kind of throw in that King Herod, the figurehead leader of the nation of Israel, who was nothing more than really a puppet for Rome. He kind of gets it in his head, you know what, I need to get rid of these Christians too. And he does so by killing James, the brother of John, who we know was one of the 12. James was one of the first disciples of Jesus to be killed. You and I know he wouldn't be the last. And see, when Herod killed James, the Jews in that area, they were pretty happy about that. And Herod and the Jewish people there, he always had kind of a tenuous relationship with them. They weren't exactly really happy to have this guy appointed to them from Rome, leading them. So he kind of saw that, hey, they're excited when I kill these Christians, so maybe if I kill more Christians, we could actually kind of find some sort of harmony together. Herod had kind of decided he was going to build better relations with his subjects using the blood of Christian leaders. And so Herod goes ahead and has Peter arrested. It's not that he's just going to go after any Christian leader. He's going after the right-hand man of Jesus, the guy who had been there through all of it. We talked about this over the course of Easter this year. We know how important Peter is to the rest of Scripture. He's not just going after anybody, he's going after the figurehead of the church. And so this church, seeing that James has been killed and Stephen has been killed, and it all looks hopeless for Peter. I mean, Herod is so determined he's going to kill Peter, and he's going to do so in a very public way, that he assigns 16 men the sole job of making sure this one guy doesn't escape. It's impossible. There's no chance. And yet Luke tells us in verse 5 that Peter was kept in prison, but the church was praying fervently to God for him. Now, Luke doesn't exactly give us a whole lot of details of what their prayers were, but I mean, if your friend had been arrested and you know it's for no good reason, what's your prayer going to be? Not all at once. You're going to be praying for him to get out, right? No matter how hopeless the situation looks, you're still going to be praying, hey, God, could you let my buddy out of jail? Like, yeah, you might be praying for some other things. You might be praying that God strengthen him, or that God encourage him, or that God keep him faithful, or that God just continue to look out for him. But I'm guessing at the core of it, your main prayer is going to be, God, let my friend get out. And so the church is gathering together in this impossible situation. They see that this is not likely going to happen. They understand that this whole situation seems hopeless. But, and do not miss this, they prayed anyway. The night before that Peter is to be brought in front of the people for a trial, he finds himself sleeping in the prison. Look at the situation a little deeper, shall you? This is the night before Peter's probably going to be killed, and Peter's going to make sure he's getting a good night's sleep. I respect that. I mean, I don't know that I'd be in the same situation, but I like the fact that Peter is just catching some Z's before the end. While he's sleeping, he kind of feels somebody poking at him, somebody jostling him, somebody trying to get him awake. And when he opens his eyes, he sees this angel. And Luke describes the angel as glowing. He's bright. He's luminous. Probably not the most peaceful way to wake up, right? I don't know about you, but if I leave the blinds in my own bedroom open a little bit when the sun is shining in, and that's what wakes me up in the morning, my first thought is not, oh, how glorious. My first thought is, kill it. And so it's kind of understandable that Peter doesn't really think this is happening. He thinks he's kind of having just a really vivid dream, but this angel tells him, hey, get up. And he stands up, and the chains that he's chained to, they just kind of fall off. That's weird. The angel tells him, go ahead and get dressed. Get your shoes on. Put your coat on. It's chilly. It's really late at night. And Peter does all of these things still thinking like, man, this is the weirdest dream I've had in a long time. I mean, I just recently had a dream about a sheet that had all kinds of like pigs and shellfish and all kinds of other stuff falling, and God telling me, go ahead and eat it. But man, this one might be weirder. So not only do they have to not wake the two guards that Peter had been chained to, which has got to be hard enough given the fact that just chains hit the floor, and I don't know if you know this, chains hitting what is likely a stone floor, that's not exactly a quiet sound, yet somehow these two guards are still sleeping. Again, respect. But they sneak out in the midst of that. Now they've got more guards outside to get past. And so Peter thinks, like, I'm going to follow you, but there's no chance we're getting out of here, especially because you're glowing and it's pitch black at night. And yet somehow they walk out. And every single guard that's been standing outside with the one job of keeping Peter in prison, they miss Peter and the really shiny dude at midnight. Probably not exactly the best guards that Herod ever hired, right? It's really dark at night. You miss the guy who's glowing like the sun. At the very least, you're fired. And somehow Peter gets past them. And they reach the big iron gate that's outside there, and the gate just kind of opens up on its own like one of those supermarket doors. And he's outside. And all of a sudden the angel just says, well, you got it, and he leaves. And it's about this moment that Peter realizes, you know what, maybe this isn't a dream. In fact, the first part of verse 11 tells us when Peter came to himself. He's shaken all the sleepies out of his head now, and he realizes this is for real. The cool night air is hitting him in the face. And he knows, I'm not asleep anymore. This is really going on. And so Peter kind of decides to do the only thing that he probably could do in that moment, right? He's got a lot of friends in this town, and he knows that they're probably worried about him. And so he wants to go and tell them, hey guys, it's all right. I'm fine. I'm out. This angel came. It was cool. So he heads off to the house where the end of verse 12 tells us many had assembled and were praying. How cool is it going to be for these folks? How amazing is it going to be for them when they realize that the prayers that they've been praying fervently for this impossible, this hopeless situation, well, those prayers have been answered. That's going to be so cool. And so Peter makes it to the house that they're all gathered in, and he knocks on the outer gate, which I've always been curious about when it comes to an outer gate. Like, do you have to bang louder to get people's attention? Because if there's a gate there, is anybody going to hear that from the house? Anybody else ever wondered that? Just me? Cool. But Peter knocks on the gate there, and this young servant girl that's in the house, a girl by the name of Rhonda, she just comes outside to find out who's banging on the gate. And when she gets out there, she hears the voice of this man who's trying to get their attention, and she recognizes it. She knows, you know what? That's Peter. What? Peter's outside right now. We're all in here praying for Peter to be released, and yet he's right here. Our prayers have been answered. And Rhonda's like, I got to tell somebody about this. She rushes back into the house, and she's excited, and she's so overjoyed and so thrilled at the fact that Peter is out of prison that she forgot to let Peter in the house. Oops. She rushes into the room where the people are just still as passionately as they have been for hours now, praying for Peter to be released, praying that he gets out of prison, praying that somehow, some way God would release him. And Rhonda stands in front of them and she excitedly yells at the top of her lungs, Peter is outside at the gate right now. And how do these folks respond to this news? Do they burst into a sudden overwhelming joy and start singing the praises of God that he has answered their prayer? Do they go and wrap their arms around Pete and sit him down and just excitedly tell him, man, it's so cool that you're sitting here because I've been praying for this all night. I've been so excited. You're right here, man. This is awesome. Is that what they do? Nope. Instead, these people who have been fervently praying for Peter to be released, they tell the woman who's told them, hey, Peter's been released. I tell her she's crazy, that she's insane. There's no chance that's going on. There's no chance Peter's out there right now. Now, if you'll excuse us, we're going to go back to praying that Peter be released. Look, guys, it's easy for us to kind of balk at this church in this situation here. I mean, they've been praying so hard for Peter to be released that they actually miss that Peter has been released. But if we're open, and if we're honest, and if we put ourselves in their place, don't you think that'd be your reaction too? I mean, this whole situation, so crazy. It's likely that before they ever went to this time to gather together to pray, that they had already made up in their minds that it wasn't going to happen. There was no chance that this prayer was going to be answered because it was just too dire. I mean, this church is carrying right now the pain of just a couple of weeks ago seeing their friend Stephen killed. They hadn't even had a chance to get over that when just a few days ago they saw James murdered. So the situation with Peter being arrested and having so many guards around him, they walked into this prayer meeting to pray for Peter's release, knowing that this prayer is likely going to go unanswered. That no matter how hard they prayed, no matter how intensely they prayed, the situation was just too impossible. They knew that before they ever went into prayer, that they were likely never going to see their friend Peter alive again. But, church, we can't miss this part. They prayed anyway. The situation seemed more than dire. They prayed anyway. The whole thing seemed so hopeless. They prayed anyway. It was impossible. They prayed anyway. See, despite the impossibility of the situation, the church prayed. And because of their prayer, God did the impossible. It would have been so easy and probably understandable for the church to just not even bother with the prayer in the first place. It had been far too simple for them to just go ahead and do what they were going to do anyway. Just get back to doing what they were going to do with the rest of their day, take care of the stuff that was going on in their world, to not even bother to take the time out to pray because the situation was hopeless. But if the church didn't prioritize the prayer, even in the midst of this hopeless situation, if the church had not prioritized that prayer, this story has a much different ending, I think. Peter's story has a much different ending than what it winds up having if this church does not pray. If they had decided that it was too hopeless, so they didn't even prioritize the time for prayer, then there's no chance the prayer would have been answered. Folks, I know. Believe me, I know. It is hard to prioritize prayer in our own lives. It's something every single one of us struggle. It's hard for me to prioritize prayer when I've had so many prayers go unfulfilled, unanswered, and seemingly unnoticed. But I'm guessing that for this church, after this night, they probably didn't have as much of a problem prioritizing prayer. Right? I'm guessing the next time that they set aside to spend time in prayer, they went into that prayer time more confident, more assured that God is in fact listening because they had just seen him do something they all thought was impossible, something they all assumed was impossible. They had seen God done, and it probably lit a fire within them to make sure to prioritize their own prayer. Because when they saw the prayer answered, it became easier to pray the next time. I can tell you from experience that when God has answered my own prayers, it has relit a fire and a desire within me to pray. I don't find it nearly as much of a challenge to make time in my schedule to pray the next time. Because I've seen God do this. Now, folks, I don't think that necessarily means that God is going to answer every single prayer. And I can't tell you why God lets some prayers go unanswered or unfulfilled, or he doesn't seem to do anything about those situations. I can't answer that for you. It's not my place. And if I tried to come up with an answer, all it would do is hurt you. But I do know that even when it seems like our prayers are going unanswered, pray anyway. Even when it seems like God doesn't care about what's going on, pray anyway. Even when it seems like the situation is hopeless, pray anyway. Because if we devote ourselves to prayer, like that first church did, then you and I are going to have an opportunity to see God do the impossible. We're going to see God move in ways that we never thought we would. We're going to see situations that we thought were hopeless happen. But we don't see that if we don't pray in the first place. We can't let our assumptions stop us from praying. We won't see prayer lead to change around us if we don't devote ourselves to that prayer. We won't see the power of praying if we aren't praying in the first place. We got to find some way to recommit ourselves to prayer. I know that's a hard thing to ask. We have to prioritize prayer more regularly in our lives. We can't let our schedules dictate when we might be able to pray. Rather, we should have prayer dictate our schedule. I've found in my own life that when I've been purposeful and I've made the time to pray, I've still had time to do everything else my schedule needed me to do. Or at the very least, if I've had to cut something, it was likely something that needed to be cut anyway. When I've made prayer more important, and I'm, again, being completely honest with you, those times have been rare, but when I've made prayer more important than my schedule, everything else still falls into place. I believe that prayer does, in fact, change things. I hope that you believe the same as me. But we can't profess to believe in the power of prayer if we're not prioritizing our prayer life. Make prayer a priority and you're going to see change happening around you. Paul, I think, put it probably better than anybody else. And he did so in 3 words. In 3 words, Paul told us more about prayer than most people ever. We see it in 1 Thessalonians 5:17, one of the easiest verses to memorize. Pray without ceasing. That's a lot, right? No matter what's going on, pray. No matter how busy you are, pray. No matter how impossible it seems, pray. No matter what, pray. If we devote ourselves to that prayer, if we devote ourselves to praying for the things that we know are within the will of God, then we're going to stir God into action. We're going to see Him move. That's going to light a fire within us. It's going to make our devotion to prayer so much easier.